Today, I'm really excited to talk to you about using Team API from Team Topologies. It's one of the most fundamental core concepts that you're going to need to use in your toolkit when you start building great teams. And I'm going to walk you through exactly why that's so important. And in the next few minutes, you're going to find out exactly what Team API is, why you should be using it, and how to implement it. I'm going to share with you a number of hints that are little tricks that I've run into that help me overcome a number of challenges. So I'm going to warn you about when you go to implement this, something you might not have thought of that could get in your way and how to overcome that, plus how to scale it out really quickly. And of course, you're going to get some resources as well. So let's dive right in. So the first thing I think we should dig into is exactly this API concept itself. So what is the API? And a small hint for many people out there, API does not mean JSON over HTTP. I know I have to address this because a lot of people, especially people newer to the industry or coming in laterally from somewhere else, hear the term API, very heavily used with HTTP APIs. Yes, that is a use case, but API is really defining that outer boundary that you're meant to be using when you're programming. It kind of helps us differentiate between the private internals of something that we shouldn't be interacting with and the external stuff that's designed for us to interact with. It stands for Application Programming Interface, but in this case, we're extending it as a metaphor to talk about how do you interact with a team when you don't need to know about the internals of the team. So in your organization, you probably have a number of teams. It's probably more than 3 teams, but let's keep it simple for now. Without a way for the teams to know how to interact with one another, it can quickly get out of control. And you get this kind of weird feeling that the teams become hard to discover. They're opaque. They almost have high walls of how do I find out what's inside of this team, what's not? How do I even talk to these people? What do they own? I think that's the most common one I get from talking to directors and executives and managers is who owns what and how do they work and what's going on? They quickly lose track of their own teams without some guiding document around this. And this is also a problem for the teams themselves as they try to figure out something they need from another team, or is there another team that offers something like this? And the bigger your organization becomes, the more pronounced this problem is. This problem isn't super obvious when you're 1 team or 2 teams or 3 teams, but as you approach a couple hundred people in your organization and you don't have something like this, you are going to start feeling the pain at all levels from junior developer to team lead to management, PM, even the executive team is going to start feeling this pain. So we need to solve that. Luckily, there is the solution, right? And that's obviously going to be Team APIs. So Team API is saying, well, let's take all those teams, remove this brick wall feeling of we don't know what's in there, and put a door on each team. So we know what the entry points are. We know how to interact with them. That's what this API is about. So this is the official page for Team API. It kind of lays out everything about what you should write in a Team API and why. You will also find a lot of the thinking behind this, but not a verbatim copy of this in the book Team Topologies, which explains to you a lot of the things that go in here, including the rationale for why a lot of those things belong in here. If you want to go deeper, then I'm going to walk you through in this video. And really just to hammer one thing home with everyone, if you think about it, the Team API, that's your external layer. That's designed for other people to use, people who are not in your team. A lot of people might ask something like, why is this not good enough? We already have a wiki page somewhere on our Notion, Confluence, whatever, that has team charter, explains how we work, explains when we meet, says what technology we own. Generally speaking, there's 2 things wrong with it. 1, it's not good enough because it's missing key pieces of information other people need. So if you think you have everything, take a look through the content of Team API and make sure you actually understand the purpose of everything in there. Read through the section of the book on covering that and challenge yourself on it, or try to use the Team API and see if it works better. Both are easy, right? You can do that in maybe an hour. You can write that document and just experiment. Now, something like a team charter, that's not something you need to share with everyone. In fact, most teams shouldn't care too much about how you operate internally. When is your stand-up meeting? Are you using Scrum or Kanban or do whatever you feel like, or it doesn't matter. These things don't matter outside, right? We're looking for ways to make it easier for other teams to know how to interact with us. We're not trying to explain to them our life story or the internal practices of our team because we're not onboarding them into the team. We're just helping them navigate navigate the boundary around our team and understand the best way to work with us without getting too deep. So they can get back to what they need to, and they're not going to interrupt us too much either. So if you look through this team API document, we're going to see a number of important things in here, such as identifying who's in your team, what kind of team are you? What's your service level expectation? The best way to get in touch with you, when you have daily sync. And I know I said it's not about showing the inner workings of your team. Maybe it's really useful for another team to join your daily sync to say something so they can get a hold of you. What are we working on? The services and systems we're owning and evolving, teams we currently interact with. I think this is the single most important thing in this document, by the way. That helps so much understanding this thing. When you're trying to do any type of heavy architectural work, lift, finding bottlenecks in the company, understanding interactions is the most critical and missed piece of software understanding, and one of the reasons we should have stable teams. Now, I'll be honest, a lot of the time I'm actually doing this in a Miro template, and there's one contributed here by Radek Ojewski, and he's contributed that right here on the Miroverse. So you can find that anytime, either by going to that link, I'll have one in the description. And so on this page, we can find a lot of the common stuff that we expect to find. Fields for the team name, team type, part of the platform, all this good stuff. You could also port this into Notion. Because I'm running a lot of interactive workshops and it's usually visual, I find this a great way to do it. You might have an easier way doing it around a Zoom call on a notepad or a Notion document or something else. Don't feel attached to this. But visually, it's quite easy to talk about this in something like a video call or a YouTube video like this. So in this document, we're going to identify, what is your team type? And that's using the team topologies team types. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. We're going to identify, is it part of a platform, which is one of the interesting things about team topologies is you could be a stream inside of a platform. And I think there's even a few extensions in here, such as, do we provide services to other teams? So are we not just doing software owned and evolved by this team, but are we doing something for another team? It's an interesting concept. And what is the service level expectation of this? There's this common thing in, for instance, Amazon, where everything you design has to be designed web scale out of the box. Nothing can ever go down in that company because any one team could be the constraint that brings the whole system down. So by default, policy is everything has to be up all the time. Now, it could be that in your company, you don't have 5 nines availability on everything, maybe only a few important things, or maybe some things aren't up to that level yet. Just put in some expectations here, right? And a lot of people don't know, if my software goes down, who do I talk to? What do I do? Just fill out that box. And then down here, we have versioning approaches. And I think versioning is something that's a little bit contentious the bigger your organization gets. I love semantic versioning 2.0. A lot of people I respect don't like it. I think they're wrong. I still respect them, but they have different opinions on that. And navigating that in a larger organization where you think 2.1.4 means something very specific and another person thinks, actually, I just felt like incrementing that number because it felt about time. It doesn't mean I've broken backwards compatibility. Or maybe it means something like, well, that's the calendar date associated with a big consumer launch. This is quite critical to understanding what I'm looking at inside of another team. Then we also have stuff in here like wiki search, how to chat with us, when we sync. We talked about that one already. And then we have this section here, and I find this to be easily overlooked, but simultaneously some of the most important stuff, especially for your management team and your leadership team. They want to understand this stuff so they can help you solve problems. And so just understanding like what are our services and systems that we own, what's actually in progress, like what systems have we opened up right now? What are we touching? Especially important in an environment where you might have one technological system that's being maintained by multiple conflicting teams, such as a monolith environment or other ball of mud style systems. Also, ways of working. Now, I said it don't need to explain the internals of a team, but it can help if you enter collaboration mode. Hey, this is how we like to work, right? So we're going to enter a deeper collaboration. Just heads up, here's what we're doing at a high level. You don't need to get into the details and the philosophy, just a little bit of a heads up. And I find this quite useful too, right? Wider cross-team organizational improvements, stuff that's not really part of the team, but giving you a heads up Here's what we're working on that's not really inside of our scope, but it's going to make everything better for everyone. Really useful to know that stuff too. And then here, the last section, who we're interacting with and why. So just filling this out, the teams that you are interacting with, right? So are you interacting as a service? Let's say you are a team that provides a complicated email functionality and you expose that as an API and everybody can consume that. Who's using it? Just explain that. Who are you interacting with? Just so it's clear. And that could be very important for a lot of things, such as cascading software changes, where there could be a ripple effect through the system, or system outages, needing to know very quickly who's impacted by this thing. Navigating that space, having it documented, this helps a lot. But also the collaboration stuff, right? If I look at your team and I see you're collaborating right now with 3 teams, your cognitive load on your team is probably very high. And so giving me a way to get in there and understand with you what kind of cognitive load your team is under helps me prioritize a little bit around you as well. It helps everybody, the team and people around the team, the leadership team, understand what kind of cognitive load is this team under. Is there a way that maybe we could do something structurally in the organization or increasing support somewhere to alleviate some of that pressure and trying to keep cognitive load balanced well, right? Are we facilitating something somewhere such as this team is the only one who knows a certain technique and now we're going to teach it to another team? And then just a bit of an explanation, like why are we doing that and how long is it going to last for? I think most of these things should have a shelf life, right? So if you read the book, collaboration is really in pursuit of either nothing. So you should collaborate and then never have an interaction, or you should collaborate and then turn into a programmatic something exposed as a service interaction. The anti-pattern being our 2 teams are competing over a domain and we're not resolving that conflict through our collaboration. We're continuously working on it forever. Having a team API like this actually is a way of identifying, hey, we are actually competing over the same ground and we haven't fixed our agreements on how to solve that. So this highlights that kind of stuff as well and lets you drive that conversation, right? So that's teams we're currently interacting with. And then Radic has over here teams we expect to interact with soon. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just again, giving people a heads up so they know when I work with your team, what should I expect going into this? Okay, so now that we've seen, it's actually quite simple. You could probably sit down with your team and fill out this thing in 1 hour. If your team hasn't run into a number of the challenges that I'm going to outline here for you, it's going to be very fast. Here's some of the challenges I've run into in practice with different teams. And the first one, this was really hard for me to get around. And the first time I even encountered this, it was a total surprise to me because I had a team that completely knew all their code and had very firm ownership. And in the same organization, in the same organizational unit, a team next to me couldn't identify their own code. So it just happened that, I took over managing that team and I said, okay, so what code do you own? And the answers were not too clear. They didn't know what they owned. They didn't know how it worked. And it was a little bit sad. And it wasn't really the team's fault. I think there was a number of factors at play there, such as a really incomplete handover. The person who should have done a handover kind of got angry and just said, instead of doing this, I give like half a handover and then I go skiing and I just leave quite early. And the team was also new and kind of forming. Some people had just joined that team and they had been operating in a very confusing build what you're told environment, not a we're going to build and deepen your understanding. So again, it's not necessarily like, oh, those programmers are bad. It could just be environmental factors, and it's almost always environmental factors, create conditions where your teams don't know what they own. And that's just one case that I run into. I run into that case again and again at so many different companies. It's for some reason still a surprise to me, but I keep running into this. Don't let it surprise you. Your teams might not know what they own, and that's actually some interesting takeaway homework if you're in the leadership team for engineering and product to figure out what's going on in the environment that created those conditions, because you need to solve those environmental conditions to get rid of that problem. Second thing that's happened to me a lot is the team, and I'm going to use the word maturity. I know a lot of people don't like the word maturity. It's nothing to do with the individual. It's just the level of rigor, discipline, skills, all of these things into a team. But I've run into this a few times where you have something like, what is the service level expectations of your software? And sometimes they don't even know what that means. Sometimes they know what it means, but they say, we don't have one because it's just not important or it's not in our engineering culture to think about service level expectations between teams. And so this is just one case, but there's other questions on that form that might be exceeding the maturity of what your engineering culture can support. And so you also have to get in there with them and help them through these problems. And here's another one that I've run into a few times is the API. And so something else that I've run into a number of times is what they put into the API is actually guesswork, sometimes for different reasons. Right? Sometimes I've seen, I don't really believe in this document. I just want to put something in here to get this manager off my back. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. And I've also seen, I'm really stressed out by this. I don't know what to do. I need to put something in here to make it look like I know what I'm doing. And I've also seen, I think it's okay for me to make a wild guess about what I'm doing. I don't see the problem with that. And there's other things I've seen too, but sometimes what's in that document is just not good information. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, but trust but verify. And I think this is a good case for that, especially when it's a new experience with the engineering culture, right? And this is a document meant to be that interconnective tissue between teams. I don't think it's necessarily overstepping to trust but verify. Don't get micromanagey, but do check that it actually stands up to a little bit of challenge. And this one comes up pretty much all the time, but it feels like it shouldn't. But actually, when you think about it in hindsight, it's going to happen a lot, especially when you don't have an organization that practices deliberate conversation about how teams should be interacting, which is the vocabulary, the terminology for what our teams own is radically different across the whole company. I've seen two teams think they own the same thing, but use two different names for it when talking to each other, and use another two different names for it when talking to other teams. And they're all talking about similar pieces or even the same piece of software. Or I've heard people use the exact same name for software when they're actually talking about different components that go into an end system somewhere. Instead of talking about the components of that they own, they're talking about the whole system. And so this could be something like the monolithic database somewhere is owned by one team, and another team somewhere says, well, actually, you don't own that. I own the tables in it. And they say, oh, actually, I don't mean I own the database. I own indexing functions for special tables that are labeled property of my team. And they say, well, you don't own that. I own that. And you get into these weird conversations with the lack of common language between the teams, and they can't actually identify what they've done. I did something interesting once. I went to everybody's wiki page. Remember I said, why can't we just use the same wiki pages we've always had in Confluence? I took the wiki pages of teams before and I said, I'm going to copy everything because they had a list of this is the software we own. I thought, well, that's really nice. I put it on a list and I put it back before all the engineering leaders and product leaders in the company. I said, cool, show me what you own. And 80% of that list went unaccounted for because they couldn't identify their own products. And so sometimes this happens, and this is, they don't know what they own and they don't have common language for it, and they are in their own language confused. So it's not that you can't solve these problems, it's just be ready to handle them. Another interesting one here is that they're not familiar with team topologies or the types of interactions in team topologies. And so it's like, oh, am I a streamline team or this team or that team? Look, the idea is you should have a team you have the ambition of moving towards. If you haven't identified it yet, don't get caught up in endless debate. If it takes you more than 5 minutes to figure out in the team API mapping session for the first time, just say you have an unidentified team type. It's completely legit. It's part of team topologies. Just say I have an unidentified team type, complete the document, but follow up and have a deeper conversation with your team after you've done a little bit more learning about the team topologies, team types, and a little bit more learning about yourself and your own team and what you're evolving towards, so that you can start to identify those things and eventually become an identified team type. And you can also do that with the interactions as well. If you have two teams that are interacting, but it doesn't seem to fit any of the common ones, you can also say, we know there's an interaction here. We just can't identify a type. Something's kind of messy. At least documenting there is an interaction is better than documenting nothing because you can't figure out which one to sort it into. It's incrementally better. But again, remember, follow up and get that sorted out. And the last thing here, and I kind of hinted at this one already for you, is a lack of document quality. And again, there's different reasons for that. And I think the biggest one here is because the team does not understand the value of this document. I have made that mistake a few times and I refuse to make that mistake ever again. If a team is going to own this document, it cannot be an assignment given to them. You have to really sit with them, explain to them, get them the context. Some people understand it because they've been to organizations where they don't have things like this. They don't have this. They see the mess and they wish they had a solution. Other organizations are growing into that mess and they've never seen it before. They don't understand why this is going to be valuable for them. And they don't understand how this solves the problem they have today, where they see the problem they have today in terms of the stress of work, the running around they're doing, but they see the day-to-day stuff. They don't see the second and third order problems that this thing solves for them that make their first order problems go away. You have to really sit down with them, explain it to them. Again, I think really read the book. There's a lot of explanation in there. There's even courses online you can take. I'll put a link in the description. Something else that I run into here is the teams do not prioritize it. And this happens a lot, especially when your teams are super overloaded or when your teams feel they're not allowed to pick what they do with their own time. Sometimes you'll get into situations where they feel like we are not allowed to spend 10, 15 minutes outside of developing that thing that the product manager wants us to deliver or that thing my manager's asking me to deliver. I've seen companies where they expect every 15 minutes of your time is put into a time tracking software and explained what Jira ticket you're working for. There's a lot of things that can hold you back from that. Your job as a leader is make sure those things are removed. Make sure that this thing can be prioritized by a team. And then the third thing there is, and they're not keeping it up to date. And it's probably an overlap of all the things on here, but they need to keep it up to date and they need to keep that thing running in a healthy condition. Now let's talk about how do you actually get this implemented. So I talked about a bunch of the challenges that you might run into, things you need to do to avoid those challenges. I'm going to talk to you about how to implement this. Implementing this is actually kind of straightforward on paper. Again, if you overcome those challenges, getting good with the teams, do the training correctly, you can get this thing scaled out really quickly. If you skip steps, if you don't get the value in place, if they don't understand what's going on, it's going to really drag its feet. What I do recommend is actually just start with one team and do a train the trainer model. Say, hey, here's what's going on. I want this to be the prototype for the rest of the organization. I want to work with you very closely to build a really class A exemplar document for what this is going to look like for everyone. And then I'd like you to work with other teams and help them learn what that is. Now, you might need to do something in your organization, in your culture to incentivize that, but that depends a lot on your company. You're going to have to navigate that on your own, but this is a really good template to get that going, right? So start with team A. So that could be you and your leadership team, or that could be an external consultancy. This could be anyone. And what they're doing is they're facilitating with a stream, and that stream is the one that's going to learn how to do this team API, right? So that's a team, an enabling team, putting skills into a stream. And then later what happens is that enabling team can move on to another team and help, for instance, stream C. And then stream A, who now knows this technique, they could start working with stream B, and stream B is going to learn it from stream A. And so now we've multiplied those efforts and we have a chain reaction of learning. There's going to be some teams that miss the concept. There's going to be some that aren't able to teach others, but generally speaking, you're going to build a powerhouse of this. And what's really nice about this is you're actually building bridges between teams that need bridges built between them. And I'm going to show you that in the next slide, but it also helps them build the social connections, but it also teaches them to be the owners of this concept instead of this is something that a trainer came in and showed us all in one session. This is actually not the most effective approach, and I've learned that the hard way, is you should actually have people take full ownership of this and they drive it through the organization. You're there to help them do that, but this is the better way to do it. It might work the other way, and I've seen it work the other way. I've had success with that, but my win ratio is much higher in this model here, with the caveat that you really need to pick that team correctly, get the train the trainer model in place, and have the back of that stream who's going to go do that work in the rest of the org. Once you hit a critical mass, this whole thing starts to take off. And the next piece of advice, and I kind of gave you a hint about this just a moment ago, is look at the teams that are interacting together. And you know they're interacting together because in your first team mapping exercise, you found out who that team is interacting with. So that team is interacting with this one through collaboration, and they're interacting with these ones here through X as a service. And so it's more meaningful to those teams because they're the ones who are going to be using the API of one another. There's a reason for them to care about this. Unlike, let's say, the unrelated stream over here, management says, well, this stream has really smart developer, and really smart developer is really good at this kind of stuff. We think it makes sense for them to learn it next. Plus, they have a lighter load this quarter. It'll be fine. But there's no incentive for them to do it to a high quality, and there's no network effect for it to take off with. What you're really looking for here is to build a strong network so it becomes a reinforcing structure in your organization. That's much more powerful. It might work the other way. It's just more likely to be cemented this way. And I kind of hinted this earlier in the video as well, but ensure that the ownership of this document is assigned as a real first-class expectation for being a great team. Great teams are great at communication, and great leaders of great teams are great at communicating and setting up their teams for this inter-team communication. A team API is the easiest way to get that done. Let's make sure that, if a manager is having their quarterly review, we see, they have their team API. That's awesome, right? It's in there. And it's not just a document full of guesswork. It's actually a good one that other people are finding useful. If not, we should give them some feedback about that. So it's something that you should actually care about and have some implementation to the rest of how your company holds its standards. If this is missing, and let's say the whole management line is not behind this, they don't care about this, it's less likely to be successful. And to really drive that home, I think, this is something that even way back in 2002, Jeff Bezos at Amazon, more early days for Amazon, he said, all teams will expose their data through interfaces. Interfaces, right? API, the I standing for interface. Teams must communicate through these interfaces. There will be no forms of interprocess, no direct linking, no reads, nothing like this. It doesn't matter what you use. It could be HTTP, Cobra, custom protocols. I don't care. All service interfaces without expectation must be designed from the ground up to be externalizable, meaning other people can pick it up and go with it. No exceptions. Anyone who doesn't do this will be fired. Thank you. Have a nice day. I don't think that's the greatest way to say this and underline the importance of this. But the point is, this idea had management backing at Amazon, right? And it got implemented across the whole company. And we all know that at Amazon, there's an internal marketplace for software because of this, right? Teams can pick up and use anything from any other team they want at any time, and they know it's going to work well and it's easy to do because of this kind of mandate. So again, ensuring document ownership has some kind of backing in this company is really important. And so what do you get out of all this? You get that org-wide on-demand clarity. You don't have to go looking through stuff. You don't have to set off special investigation projects and tiger teams to sift through code and create special maps. You can short circuit all of that. You just get instant clarity, right? You need to know something, you can get it. And then on top of that, you get the building blocks for doing deeper team topology work. And I've shared with you a few mistakes I've made about doing this. And this is one of them is I should have really gotten this in place first because I wanted to go and do that team topologies work. And I said, okay, team, who is your user? What do they need? And what are the base capabilities behind that? And we really had a stunted start with that. I had to do a restart and we kind of wasted an entire iteration there because we had a false start where people didn't get the core concept. And this is a fundamental thing. If your teams are not up to that level of communication, ownership, clarity, you can install that first and bring them up a level before you go into something much more interesting. And I'm not saying you need to do this. I'm just saying getting this in place first sets up your odds of being successful a lot better. It also means your teams can move a lot faster where interactions come into concern. So should these two teams work together or not? Are we overloaded? Just having some situational awareness by default, some transparency by default really helps us get through these things faster because we're not playing guessing games. We're not going on information hunts. It's just there out in the open. And I think the best thing there is, it's obviously a very concrete increment towards that world where we have a non-blocking async tech culture where you can opt into somebody's resources. That Amazon dream state where you can use anyone's service at any time might be too far, but for most people's organizations, incrementing one notch towards it is usually a better state. But going all the way might be too far for you. You're going to have to figure that out on your own, but at least you know concretely, if I do this, I make a good increment towards that state. And that's it. That's the whole thing for Team Topology's Team API. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, you can hit the like button. You can subscribe if you want more stuff like this, because I'm going to keep producing this. And a lot of the resources that I shared with you in the chat are going to be in the comments, including a discount code for you to get a discount on the Team Topology's courses. So you can find out even more about this concept than what I've covered here in the video. So I'll see you next time, and thanks for watching.